Welcome back to Excel. This is a mental evolution podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Seth Rose. And we are at episode 40. We've been plugging along here. So hopefully you've been enjoying this as much as I have, creating this and coming up with some of the ideas for this podcast. And today's episode is going to be talking about failure and changing your relationship with failure. The acronym that I always like to tell athletes and performers is, FAIL really stands for first attempt in learning. So it's this like fail forward mindset. Productive failure is critical to our learning process. And changing that relationship with failure can aid in your future growth and success. And then persevering in the face of failure really requires like a mental shift to change that relationship and recognize that failure isn't going to be the end all be all. So changing how you view failure changes your response to it. So taking the time to review the failure or setback and asking really key reflection questions here. What lessons did you learn? How can you do something different next time? What did you do well? What did you do not so well? So it's not a matter of when you're going to fail. It's about how you're going to respond to it because, we know that we're going to make mistakes and failures are just part of the process. And understanding that failure isn't a representation of you as a person. You failed. You are not a failure. Last episode, we talked about growth mindset versus fixed mindset characteristics. And failures is another piece of that too. A growth mindset person might use them to learn and treat them as lessons to learn from, where somebody who has a fixed mindset might not like failures. They hate them. They avoid failing. They get discouraged. And so understanding the differences there can really help. So here's an exercise that you can do is not only with the reflection questions and incorporating those into your practices and your training is pick a recent mistake or failure that you had that we're going to work on. And on the left side of your paper, you're going to write out the worst case scenario of your mistake. Let your brain go to the most catastrophic place here. Next, you're going to counter the thinking on the right side and capture the absolute best case scenario. Be equally extreme in both situations here. And then lastly, in between those two, is you're going to record the most likely and realistic consequence of that mistake or failure. Going in order in this exercise is really important. So start with the worst case to get it out of our heads and break this type of thinking with the equally extreme best case scenario. And then we're going to ground ourselves enough to develop the likely consequence in the middle. And so from here, then creating a way forward to prevent or to learn from that mistake from occurring again, or jotting down some notes for us to rationalize if it ever happens again. Okay. So that type of exercise really can provide some perspective to things that are going on when it comes to limiting catastrophizing when we are presented with mistakes or failure, and decreasing the rumination that our thoughts, spend on, because we can get pretty negative when we're talking about things that didn't go so hot, especially if we're trying to shift that mindset. So changing that relationship with failure, a little bit of awareness here, some reflection questions for you, and remembering that failure isn't final and that we can always learn from the things that we are presented with in those moments. Thanks for sticking around, and we'll catch you on the next one.